It wasn't about like, wow, I love the pictures I was getting. It was about the process. And photography for me at the time was an excuse to go and explore things. With that camera, I felt like I had to go and insert myself into situations that I normally wouldn't be in as like a visitor or a tourist or whatever. And I really love the process, and I still love the process.
Ja, das sind die Worte von George Steinmetz. George ist bekannt für seine atemberaubenden Luftaufnahmen und seinen einzigartigen Blick auf die Welt. Seit mehr als 3 Jahrzehnten erkundet der Fotograf unseren Planeten aus der Vogelperspektive mit einem motorisierten Paraglider und hat dabei einige der faszinierendsten Orte und Kulturen eingefangen. Seine Arbeiten wurden in führenden Magazinen wie National Geographic, The New York Times oder Geo veröffentlicht. In seinem aktuellen Projekt Feed the Planet beschäftigt sich George Steinmetz mit den globalen Nahrungsketten, ihren Auswirkungen auf Mensch und Umwelt und den Herausforderungen, eine rasant wachsende Weltbevölkerung nachhaltig zu ernähren. Seit Beginn der Domestizierung von Pflanzen vor rund 11.000 Jahren hat der Mensch bereits 40% der Erdoberfläche in Ackerland umgewandelt. Bei einer prognostizierten Weltbevölkerung von 9,7 Milliarden Menschen im Jahr 2050 sowie einem steigenden Lebensstandard in den schnell wachsenden Nationen muss die weltweite Nahrungsmittelproduktion schätzungsweise um 60% steigen. Die meisten von uns kommen mit rohen Lebensmitteln nur im Supermarkt in Berührung und sind sich der Produktionsmethoden oft nicht bewusst. In vielen Fällen unternimmt die Lebensmittelindustrie auch große Anstrengungen, um zu verhindern, dass wir sehen, wo genau unsere Lebensmittel hergestellt werden. Der Zugang zu diesen Informationen ist aber extrem wichtig für unsere persönlichen Entscheidungen darüber, was wir essen möchten und hat in Summe auch enorme Auswirkungen auf die Umwelt. Das und vieles mehr zeigt das Projekt von George Steinmetz. Es ist ein Projekt, das zeigen soll, wie unsere Lebensmittel hergestellt werden, damit wir bessere, informiertere Entscheidungen treffen können. Wie er zu diesem ehrgeizigen Projekt gekommen ist, wie er es umsetzt und wie es seinen Blick auf Lebensmittel verändert hat, darüber sprechen wir in diesem Interview mit George Steinmetz. Wir, das sind Pia Parolin und ich. Pia hat mich ein weiteres Mal hervorragend am Mikrofon mit ihren spannenden Fragen unterstützt. Aufgezeichnet haben wir dieses Gespräch im vergangenen Jahr, also im September 2023, im Rahmen der Medientage des Open-Air-Foto-Festivals Open Your Eyes in Zürich. Initiiert wurde das Ganze von Lois Lammerhuber und seinem Team, das ja bereits seit Jahren vor den Toren Wiens in Baden Europas größtes Open-Air-Foto-Festival organisieren, Lagassili Baden Foto. Und ja, jetzt auch ein Festival, das Wissenschaft und Fotografie zusammenbringen möchte, um die drängendsten Herausforderungen unserer Zeit sichtbarer und verständlicher zu machen. Wenn du mehr über das Festival erfahren möchtest, dann hör gerne in die bisher darüber erschienenen Podcast-Folgen nochmal rein. Die Links dazu findest du in den Shownotes der Podcast-App, mit der du diese Episode hörst. Ja, dass ich momentan mit vielen Dingen hinterherhinke, zeigt nicht nur die Tatsache, dass dieses Interview mit George Steinmetz schon eine ganze Weile im Archiv gelegen hat. Auch diese Folge erscheint etwas später als gewohnt. Eine längere Reise nach Kuba und zuletzt nach Argentinien haben mich doch kräftig aus dem gewohnten Rhythmus gebracht. So sehr ich den Podcast auch liebe und dir verlässlich neue Inhalte in gewohnter Qualität präsentieren möchte, so sehr wollte ich die Zeit natürlich auch in Argentinien und Kuba nutzen, um so intensiv wie möglich zu fotografieren. Ein paar Einblicke habe ich dir ja bereits schon bei Zoom gegeben, zuletzt aus Argentinien. Falls du nicht mit dabei sein konntest, findest du die Links zu den Videos auch nochmal in den Shownotes. Die Themen Tango in San Telmo und Fußball in Buenos Aires. Mit letzterem kehre ich so ein bisschen zu meinen Wurzeln als ehemaliger Fußballreporter zurück. Das Projekt über Fankultur in Argentinien wird mich sicherlich noch eine ganze Weile begleiten und auch in unserer Visual Storytelling Akademie Abenteuer Reportagefotografie, die ich gemeinsam mit Thomas Jones mache, eine Rolle spielen. Alle kommenden Termine findest du unter www.abenteuer-reportagefotografie.de/Termine. Terminübersicht. Ja, schau da gerne mal rein und auch in unser Workshop-Angebot. Die beiden Street-Workshops in Düsseldorf Mitte März sind zwar bereits ausgebucht für die Workshops in Helsinki, Hamburg und Lissabon. Im weiteren Verlauf des Jahres sind aber noch Plätze frei. Bei Fragen kannst du dich natürlich gerne jederzeit an uns wenden. Zu Helsinki und Lissabon veranstalten wir zudem demnächst auch noch 2 Info-Webinare bei Zoom, wo du Bilder und Videos zu sehen bekommst. So, und jetzt aber direkt zum Interview, das Pia Parolin und ich mit George Steinmetz geführt haben. Viel Spaß! Well, thank you very much, George, for taking the time to do this interview. We met in Baden a couple of weeks ago. There we didn't have time, but fortunately you are also here in Zurich, so we have a chance to do it here. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
We were already talking a little bit about getting into photography, or what is the best way to get into photography. You get asked this question a lot from aspiring photographers. Some say that, or very few actually say they were born a photographer. You grow into becoming a photographer. I think this is more common also, what I've gathered from the interviews I've done with photographers. How was it in your case? You dropped out of college and then the travel bug kind of hit you.
Yeah, I dropped. I was restless in college, and I took I thought it'd be a year off to go traveling in Africa, and I thought I'd see exotic things like I'd grown up seeing in the pages of National Geographic. And so I thought I'd see, exotic people and wild animals and stuff like that. And so I bought a camera, and I fell in love with the process of taking pictures. This is a long time ago. This is like 1979. I'm 66 years old, and that was a long time ago. But back then, with film, I couldn't see my pictures. I was mailing the film back to my mother, and you can't always believe your mother, especially about the quality of your work. Everything you do is wonderful. And so I'd mail, I'd go to the capital of a African country, and I'd mail 6 rolls or 10 rolls of film to my mother. And then she would write me, letters back with glowing reviews, how wonderful they were. But I get them 6 weeks later, and I couldn't remember what I had photographed. It was and it was in film, and you can't trust your mother. And so it was for me. So it wasn't about wow, I love the pictures I was getting. It was about the process, and photography for me at the time was an excuse to go and explore things. With that camera, I felt like I had to go and insert myself into situations that I normally wouldn't be in as a visitor or a tourist or whatever. And I really love the process, and I still love the process.
Mm-hmm. Before going to Africa, what role did photography play in your life?
Amusement. I wasn't very serious. I just, look at, back then, before, the internet and stuff, you just look at pictures in magazines and books, and occasionally be fascinated by something that caught your eye.
Mm-hmm. And then you said that it was more about the process of the pictures. What were on your travels? What were the subjects that drew your attention? What were you focusing on in your pictures? Was it to convey a feeling, or situations, or a subject?
In Africa, I became fascinated with traditional peoples, looking at kind of ancient cultures that still persisted largely intact. And so I decided, when I was hitchhiking, I met an anthropologist quite by accident. And I was in Niger, and she knew the Fulani there. And so we went and spent some time in some Fulani villages and in their little huts and such. And I became fascinated by people having a really ancient way of life in, the late 20th century. And so I decided to go and look at other cultures, ancient cultures that still persisted. And this is a very different Africa than today. There were no mobile phones. There were very few paved roads. And there were, so I was looking for kind of the pockets of Africa where people were still in traditional clothes and, no tin roofs and stuff, and kind of old Africa. Mm-hmm. And I went to great efforts to find those kind of last little pockets. I went out in the pygmy forest with pygmies hunting, and they wear just a little bark cloth and stuff. And it's really fascinating to see how they their bushcraft, how they made a fire, how they made shelter, how they found food in the forest, things like that.
This sounds like for a trip to go from college to Africa and go to these places to really investigate the cultures. And how did you gain access to all these places?
It's not easy, but also I didn't speak anything other than English. So I had to learn French as I traveled. I learned a little bit of Swahili. I learned a little bit of Arabic, and you have to ingratiate yourself with people. And I started smoking cigarettes because I had no money. I mean, I spent a year in Africa on $5,000 and largely by not paying for rides or hotels, and people just take me in, and you have to make friends with people. So I get some local cigarettes and I offer them a cigarette. So you can share something of some commonality, even if you can't communicate, you can, still smoke the local cigarette. Anyway, so you just try and, you be curious and ask a lot of questions and be friendly.
How has that experience informed your later career as a photographer, in terms also of, developing all these social skills to gain access, because it's a huge part of photography. I mean, clicking the shutter button is one thing. You can learn all the technical aspects of your camera, how to use it. But if you're not in the situations where you can take interesting photographs and know how to interact with people, it's difficult.
Yeah, Africa for me was kind of like finishing school. I mean, it was like graduate school, and I went to Stanford University. I got a great education, but it didn't. I had to be able to ingratiate myself with everything from like nuns to drug smugglers and all kinds of people. The whole loggers and pygmies and whatever, and you had to know how to insert yourself in a situation. Sometimes it's by being friendly with people. Sometimes it's kind of by being in the background, being like a fly on the wall, but you have to get a feeling. And I really developed a love for Africa and Africans and in a very kind of grassroots level. And I feel extremely comfortable when I go back there. I feel like I can, it's good.
It sounds like a wonderful adventure, how you started photography. And I asked myself, was there a certain point where you switched from this kind of, it's a bit stupid word, but this ego focused traveling to, I want to do something meaningful with my photos?
Well, I had this kind of epiphany. I was in the pygmy forest. My idea, I grew up, it's kind of embarrassing, but I grew up in Beverly Hills, California, like one of the richest communities in America. And I wanted to get away from that. I went to a fantastic university, but I wanted to look at the opposite side of that. So, the furthest I could get away from that reality, I thought, was in the Congo with pygmies. And when I finally got there, I realized it wasn't, what was interesting, it wasn't about getting away from where I was from. It was trying to understand where I was. And so trying to understand like how, let's say, how pygmies made fire with like no matches, how they made shelter when they had just the forest, what the forest provided. These guys basically had a machete and bare feet, and they were able to make a living. And it was fascinating looking at that bushcraft and their understanding of their ecosystem. And so it made me realize there were all these worlds to try to understand. And then I was trying to capture that in pictures so I could share that and reveal with people in my own world.
And did you already have these pictures in mind? You mentioned National Geographic before. Were these pictures that you had in mind, or how did you get your inspiration to make photos that really affect people when they look at them?
I was just trying to basically I was just trying to kind of do documentation and tell the story of where I was. And I thought that, I didn't really know what I was doing photographically. I had no training, but I just figured, if somebody's got to do this, why not me? If I work really hard, maybe I can, I can make a living out of that. And it worked out. I felt kind of lucky that it did.
When was the first time that you realized for yourself that the pictures that you took actually were or had the quality to be published in big magazines? Was there a point when you kind of realized, oh, this is actually quite good what I'm producing?
Well, when I first went out, I was with films. I took a lot of bad pictures, like 99.99% were really bad pictures. And you go, because I had no feedback. I was taking pictures and you send it to my mother. And I remember I got back, I looked at them all. I stayed up like all night and I went through everything, and it was really depressing because I had all these incredible experiences, and I looked at all these really shitty pictures I had taken of these incredible things, and like it really had fucked up. But then you go through that, and then you find that the few things that work, and you try to analyze like why that worked and try to understand why everything else failed, and you get better. And then you collect. One of the nice things about photography is you kind of forget about all the bad pictures. They kind of like they just kind of die, and the ones that live are your successes, and you build on that. And I took my collection of my precious pictures, and I went and showed those to some people, and beyond my mother's friends, and I love my mother, but eventually, you see some people and they say, wow, that's really, I saw some professional people that I would seek out through friends of friends, and you get some reaction to see if like, does this have any value? And I did get some positive reaction, but it was many years before I started actually getting assignments and getting jobs. It takes time. It's a process.
So it's really autodidactical how you grew, or did you have a mentor at a certain point, or someone who really supported you? Or sometimes single persons can play a key role, and you just need to be lucky to meet them. Or maybe there are also strategies to meet these people. Yeah,
I didn't have like a key mentor. It was more what you call autodidact, self-taught. But when I was trying to get going in photography, I started getting jobs as a photo assistant. Because I just sending out letters and trying to get jobs, and it kept failing. So I realized that there was things I didn't know, and I needed to find somebody who knew more than I did. And I went and I met through a friend. I met a photographer named Ed Cashy, and Eddie, he's about my age, and he was more successful than I was. He was getting jobs from magazines, and so he let me go with him on his first couple of jobs as an assistant. And I worked for Ed for about a year before he fired me for what we call in English called insubordination, like not following directions. But anyway, Eddie, he taught me. He's still one of my best friends, and he taught me a lot about how the business worked. And the thing, I didn't know how to use artificial light like strobes and stuff, and now I don't use that material so much. But back with film, that was really, for taking pictures indoors, that was really key. Now with I think with digital cameras, we're really spoiled. You can take a picture that would have been absolute shit on film, and you can actually make it look good with Photoshop, and some of the sensors now are so incredible. Really, in photography, we're really kind of in a fantasy era right now compared to where it was when I got started.
Mm-hmm. Ed Cashy is one of the best photojournalists out there, a brilliant storyteller. What did you learn from him in terms of storytelling, how to create, craft a narrative with your images?
I didn't really learn that kind of stuff from Ed. What I learned from Eddie was we were doing day jobs where you get like he would get a call from a magazine, and they wanted a photograph, let's say like a winemaker. And I was in San Francisco, so they wanted for like a winemaker in Napa Valley, or some businessman in Silicon Valley. Computers were just starting. The computer industry was just getting going. And you get a job from like Business Week to go and photograph the president of some chip manufacturing plant. And we go down there and walk around, and it's like, oh, this is like, I walk in and say, man, this looks really bad. Like, there's nothing to photograph here. And Eddie would pull a picture out of it. And I saw like what he did, and with lighting, and how he dealt with the people, and how he dealt with the clients. And I asked him 1,000 questions, and I learned kind of how the business worked. Mm-hmm. And I went and saw National Geographic with my little portfolio. I had my little college sport jacket, and I went to see National Geographic, and I crashed and burned. But the guy there, he told me that I saw the head photography person there, and he told me that I had a lot of, he liked what he saw, but he told me I needed to know how to use artificial light. And so that's something that Eddie taught me how to do.
Mm-hmm. When did you go back to National Geographic then, after the first rejection and the tip to work on on the use of artificial light?
I went back a couple years. I waited until they had a change of editor. That's always a really good time to go, because usually a new editor, they want to bring in their own people. And so they had a change of editor, and I went and I was able to get an appointment with the head guy, and I showed him my portfolio, and he liked what he saw, and he asked me if I had any ideas. And my first, he liked one of my proposals. I suggested doing a story about how oil is found, like oil exploration, which is what I'd studied in college. I got a degree from Stanford in geophysics, and I had some summer jobs working in the oil industry. And so, there's an old saying in photography or in writing to photograph what you know or write about what you know. And I knew the oil business because I'd worked in it, and I'd spent a lot of time I worked in field crews where these guys would go out. I was in Mexico on a crew trying to figure out where to drill for oil. And we'd sit around the bar with these guys. For years, I heard all these stories about of their adventures around the world, these international oil men. And so I understood the industry, how it worked. And I proposed this to the Geographic, and they gave me the assignment. And it was really quite extraordinary because I thought they would get me to Texas for a couple of weeks. And we went into the meeting, and they said, no, this is an international story. So yeah, sure, great idea. And then I didn't know what I was doing, but I worked in that story for like a year and a half, and I went all over the world. It was incredible. I went to Manchuria in the winter. I went to Alaska. I went diving in the Red Sea. I went running New Guinea in helicopters. Of course, I went to Texas. I went to France in the North Sea. I got in an oil rig in the North Sea. I went all over the world. This is the old days of the Geographic when they had gobs of money. I mean, back then you didn't talk about money. That was crass. There was no budget. You just went, and all air travel was first class. It sounds kind of crazy now, but it was just like the pictures were really valuable back then. Now it's a very different world in photography. So it's quite extraordinary.
Yeah. Now we are already at the beginning of your career as a photojournalist. Stepping back a little bit, when you graduated from college, was there ever a time when you said there was a plan B or was it clear to you back then that you wanted to become a photojournalist and pursue that career?
Well, after my first travel in Africa, I thought that was what I wanted to do, but I was a realist, and I wasn't sure if it would work out. And at the time, oil prices were really high. This is when like Jimmy Carter was president, and there was the oil embargo with OPEC. And my major in college was like the second highest paying major you could have. And so I got my degree in geophysics basically as kind of an insurance policy in case photography didn't work out. And fortunately for me, it worked out.
It did work out. And, at some point, you started with this very unique idea to construct a vehicle that put you in a place to take aerial photography, photographs. How did that come about? When did that occur to you that it's going to be a good idea to go up into the air? Well,
when my first trip in Africa, I was hitchhiking, and when you're hitchhiking, most of the vehicles were trucks, and they're open trucks, and since I wasn't paying, I would sit on top of the cargo up on the roof, and you have to like duck the trees. But I was like riding high in the truck, and it was kind of like flying over Africa. I mean, in a low altitude way, like 10 meters. And I just thought, wouldn't it be amazing if I could actually fly over that landscape and see it like a bird? And my first leg across Africa was across the Sahara, and the landscape there is really incredible. But I thought, if I could have control over where I went, I wasn't just riding the back of a truck. I could go flying around. I could really see that really beautiful. I saw the deserts as really beautiful, and I could see those in a unique way. And so, after getting a few jobs from National Geographic, I thought I had enough credibility that I could get them to support a big project in the Sahara. And so I proposed doing a story on the desert, and the place I wanted to go, there were no aircraft to hire. There's just like there are no helicopters in Niger or Chad, so you had to do your own. And there was I heard about a new kind of aircraft called the motorized paraglider. And I did my research, and it seemed like it would be somewhat reasonable to do. It seemed like it would be, and my mother thought a lot of people thought I was crazy that I'd get killed. But you don't, when you're asking about something, you don't talk to people who say it's dangerous. You have to find people actually who've done it. And I talk to people who actually done that kind of flying. And they said it was reasonable as long as I flew early in the morning and late in the afternoon when the air is really calm. And that's when I want to take pictures anyway. So anyway, I learned how to fly. I bought my own gear. Mm-hmm. And I talked National Geographic into paying for it. And I went to Africa and it was an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great story. And what were some other challenges that you had getting this thing started? You said like the time of the day is important. What were other challenges that you met at the beginning in navigating?
Well, the most obvious thing is like, I was piloting while I'm taking pictures. And to take pictures, I have, I'm not doing like a selfie stick. I mean, I have both hands in the camera, so you're flying hands free. And if you have any kind of mistake out there, it's going to be really bad because there's no, there's no, ambulance service, there's no phones out there. You're on your own. And, when I was learning how to fly, I befriended a French pilot who had one of these kinds of aircraft, and he was an MD, he was a doctor. And I talked him into going with me. And before we went, I told him we should probably get some kind of like a medical kit in case there was an accident, like a first aid kit. In particular, like maybe like he was a doctor, could he get like some morphine? Because the most common thing when you have an accident like that is you have a spinal cord injury. And if you had a spinal cord injury out in the Sahara, it can be, you're in 4-wheel drive for days to get any help. And he goes, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to be really careful. It's like, that's not an option. And it was kind of, and back then I used to fly with an emergency parachute. I thought, because these motors are not reliable. Yeah. And even the wings, the paraglider wings were not that reliable back then. And I was worried about having some kind of catastrophic aircraft failure and wanted to throw an emergency parachute. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, you don't really want to do that. You want to, and I thought he was crazy, but he was right, because if you have an emergency parachute, it actually makes you less airworthy. You have more stuff. And the whole ethos of that is minimalism. It's kind of like people who go free climbing, when you free climb, you're really light and you're really fast. So it's actually, if you're good, it's safer. It's like you don't have all this stuff. And particularly like if you want to get up a mountain really fast, you have all that stuff. It's going to actually safety can be dangerous. Too much safety equipment can be dangerous. Mm. So anyway, that was what the big challenges was, trying to be able to pilot and take pictures. And then when you're taking pictures, you have to forget about the flying to a certain extent, and it's challenging.
Yeah. Challenging also to frame the pictures. I mean, it's one thing to go up there and have this aerial view of a scenery, which is a unique perspective for many people, and these images always have a certain novelty for people. But what was your focusing or your idea of composing these kind of pictures that you were able to take from?
Now I think we're kind of spoiled now in this period of drones. Like anybody with $1,000 can go and buy, or €1,000 can buy a drone. But when I was flying this back in like the late 90s, there was nobody who was taking pictures between like 100 feet and 500 feet. Like in a helicopter, you wouldn't fly that low because you have all this dust. And so I kind of own that altitude all to myself. There was nobody else doing it. And that kind of, and with the paraglider, you're flying, it's like you're in a flying lawn chair. There's no window, there's no wheel underneath you. There was it's just, you have to watch out for your knees if you use a really wide angle lens. So I could photograph relatively close to the ground with a wide angle. It's a very intimate kind of aerial view. And so I was seeing things that nobody had seen the world, that part of the world anyway, in a way that really never been seen before. And that was really exciting. But when you're low and slow, if you have a problem, you're going to be landing quite quickly. Yeah. So.
And the first pictures you took in Africa, or where was the first?
Yeah, I started in Niger. My proposal to the Geographic was to go to Niger and Chad, and it's I had this kind of a epiphany moment where we were trying to photograph salt caravans, or these caravans of camels that carry salt out of the Sahara. There was an oasis that was a kind of a saltwater oasis, and we got there at the right time of year, and there were caravans of hundreds of camels loaded with salt, and it was just one of these kind of like epic things. It was just like it was like kind of the real Lawrence of Arabia. And these guys are all in turbans and their camels and going out for days and these big chains of camels. And I went up on a flight and we got really lucky. There were two caravans passing going opposite directions, and I got pictures of the two of them. And it had like what my friend Ed Cashy used to call a fogasm, where it's like a visual orgasm. Ooh. You get this kind of like retina to brain shock when you see something that you've never seen before. And I had like a major fogasm, and I came back and I was just like, I felt like this is going to work, because I was seeing things I was seeing something. There have been a lot of people that photographed those caravans, but I was seeing it in a totally from above, like from like 150 feet. I was seeing it in a totally different way that opened up the landscape, and it kind of decoded the landscape for people who didn't really know the Sahara. So I felt like, wow. And then as I kept going with the glider, I had a lot of fogasms in that trip and seeing really amazing things. And it was an epic trip. And I was actually, when I remember like getting on the plane when we left Niger, I was like, I freaking survived, because I wasn't really sure if don't want to sound dramatic, but it's a risky game.
Yeah.
And it's like, we made it. And then it was like, but it's kind of like when you play, a video game and you get to the next level, you say, oh, that was really tough. And then it's like, oh, that was a harder level. And so it kept getting harder. And I kept at it for about 15 years with the glider. Yeah.
How important is planning and research that you do beforehand, and how much do you just rely on your skills of your capacity to adapt to the unexpected, and did this change during your lifetime and growing experience?
Research is key, and it's not, to me, getting great pictures is not about having a magic retina. It's about knowing your subject and doing your planning. And before I went to the Sahara, for example, I spent a few weeks going around Europe, going to see experts, because the Sahara is it was best known by some of the colonial era scientists who it had the resources to study it really well. And so I went and saw some of the best scientists who knew the geography and the geology of the Sahara. And I went to and talked to them and asked them where to go, where the most best places, and asked to see pictures of places, and got their maps, and went through, went and saw Theodore Monod when he was still alive in his library in Paris. And he gave me a few hours before he finally kicked me out, going through his books, and I found some really cool stuff. And so I had like all these certain areas that I wanted to go to, because it's just, and I went to the Institute of Géographie Nationale in Paris, and they had these incredibly detailed maps, these colonial era maps that would show me like the dune patterns in all these different parts of the Sahara, so I could see like what the dune forms look like in different parts of the Sahara. So, ooh, I want to go here because you have these kind of dunes going through a lake, and then when it's dry, they'd be sticking out of the lake. And it was very detailed research.
It sounds as if it takes a lot more time to do the research before, and to travel to places, to talk to people before you go to the real spot where you take the photos.
Yeah. And these are, you go out there and there's nobody to talk to in the Sahara. I mean, mostly it's just sand. And so, and it's also expensive to travel out there. I mean, we were doing, to travel these areas, we had to have at least 3 cars. And these are expert 4-wheel drive cars in a very poor country. So there's a lot of money to do that. To sleep in the sand with a bunch of guys with guns. But it was, we were looking at a couple $1,000s a day to be in the field. And so you want to know exactly where you're going. And then you have a bad weather day or a sandstorm goes up. You have to say, do we go here? Do we go there? You have to be, it has to be very planned out. And I had, I went and saw scientists who had like satellite images of different things. And I really knew where I wanted to go.
And did you also connect to local people and keep up something like a relationship or long-term projects, following up on the same people and telling their story over years or something?
Well, communication, this is before cell phones. So it was really, it's difficult to keep up with people out there. It was really in person. And you go and talk to the guides, and we get one of the key things is finding the right guide to take you around, somebody who really knows the area and they can tell you where it's safe to go. Because there's a lot of insecurity out there, especially now after the demise of Libya. There's a lot of weapons out there, but you have to have somebody who can tell you, is it safe to go here because of, do we have enough range? Can we get fuel? If we go up there, can we get fuel? If you can't get fuel, you're going to die. You're going to die, in the desert. So you have to know somebody you can really trust. And you go and you meet these guys. Remember the first time I went to Sahara, I met Mohammed Iksan. I gave him like $20,000 in cash. And this guy's like, wearing a turban. You meet him in a little hotel and he gives the guy $20,000. And then you hope to hell that he shows up the next morning with the vehicles. And he rocked up with like these 3 fabulous Land Cruisers, with like 3 drums of petrol in the back. And we were ready to rock and roll. Mm. But I knew that he was the guy because I went and saw Uwe Georg. I saw Uwe in Hamburg. You say, who's like the best guy? And he goes, oh, you need to talk to Mohammed. Mm-hmm. So, and then I called Mohammed up months in advance to reserve his time for the best time of year with the camel caravans. It was all, it's not like you're not setting up pictures, but it was incredibly detailed planning.
Yeah.
And I try and do that as much as possible on every project.
Mm. Another project that you're currently working on, Feed the Planet, is also very, when it comes to doing research, very challenging. I see lots of research going on into the topics and the things you photograph there. When did that idea occur to you to dedicate such a big part of your career to this long-term project?
Well, it came as it was kind of a gimme. I've been flying for a long time with the glider, and I kind of ran out of sand. And an editor friend of mine at National Geographic asked me if I'd be interested in doing a story about the global food supply. They were trying to do a story about how we're going to meet the future food demands of humanity. And he thought that my aero perspective could be an interesting way to look at farming. And I didn't know much about farming. But I thought, that could be interesting, but it would be best if I could photograph like mega farms, because I knew from I'm working in Africa, you don't want to photograph 2 zebra under a tree. You want to find 5,000 zebra migrating, and then all in a line. Then it gets really interesting. So I wanted to look at the mega farms, and he thought that would be interesting because it would communicate the idea of feeding 9 billion people. When you saw let's say a feedlot with, 50,000 cows, that would communicate feeding the world. So anyway, it was their general idea to look at food from the air. And then when I started working on it, I realized that there was a deeper story to be told. And I worked on it for them for about a year, which seems incredibly luxurious to most people. But when you're looking at something like the global food supply, that's just scratching the surface. And so when I was working for the Geographic, I decided to go to 3 countries. I decided to work in the United States, which has the most industrialized food system in the world, and Brazil, which has the fastest growing food system. And then I wanted to look at China, which has become the world's largest importer of food. So look at kind of supply, demand, and industrialization, because industrialization of food is the dominant trend in the food systems. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I did that for a year, and I realized I was still it was really complicated. I was going to the coast of China, and when you go south from Shanghai along the coast, it looks like a floating city. There's so many fish farms out in the ocean. It's just as far as you can see, it's like little dots and people living in these little huts out in the ocean. And then I realized that basically the Chinese had fished out the whole East China Sea. It's all the fish are gone. And so they had these fish farms. They're like, well, where is the fish meal coming from? And I looked at the bags and it's coming from Peru. It's like, when in Peru? So it's basically they're using ground up Peruvian anchovies to feed the fish in China. And some of that stuff gets exported to the United States. And I realized there were all these food chains that were really complicated, international food chains. And as I started working on it, I just found more and more things like that were internationally related. And I found that really fascinating. And there are all these stories to be told. And so when I finished that story for the Geographic, I proposed another on China's food system. And then I wanted to look at marine fisheries. And I spent a few years looking at ocean fishing. And then I realized Europe has very different food systems. So I got an assignment from Le Figaro to do a story on European food systems. And now I've been doing this for 10 years. It's kind of a crazy project. I can't really find, the magazine industry has deteriorated so much. I can't really find funding for a lot of things I want to do. So I'm just doing it with my own money. I went to India 3 times because I couldn't find somebody to pay for a story about India's food system. It was just I found it fascinating, but for most people, it's kind of a little bit too obscure, So.
But still going, it's still an ongoing project. You keep on working on it?
Well, I'm kind of finishing up now. It's been 10 years and I haven't lost interest, but I've done most of the big, the major pieces. And I was just shooting this past week in the Alps, looking at sheep and goats and cattle that migrate up in the summer and back down in the fall. And 2 days ago, I was photographing the hops harvest north of Munich. But because hops are kind of a unusual crop. Anyways, I'm kind of finishing up, but it's kind of a crazy obsessive project.
Yeah. Yesterday at the dinner table, we were also touching on this topic, and Pia, you're a biologist, and you ask a quite interesting question, or you were talking about the difference between the United States and Europe, and the way the landscapes are constructed, and the impact of man on the environment. Maybe we can, because it was so fascinating, we didn't have the recorder running. We can reproduce a little bit of that conversation.
Yeah, I feel a little bad about that conversation. I felt like I was the ugly American.
It was over a glass of wine, and it was not the first glass of wine that evening, so it was fun. No, don't worry. But I thought it was really interesting that you had such a different approach or point of view, obviously, than we have from Europe. So yeah.
So we were talking about like how, like here in Switzerland, for example, most of the farmers I've met here, they get about half of their income from the government for these, for having their animals like graze up in the high pasture. And it seems very odd that they're getting paid by the government to maintain an artificial system. And from an American perspective, it seems like it might be better just to let it rewild. But that's not what people want to do.
Well, it's a controversy in Europe as well. There are some people who say it's better to just leave nature to itself and let it develop. But what we do most of the time, or what the political decisions are, is that we try to maintain this man-made diversity, because it's something that occurs naturally, that you have open fields where specific species of plants, of flowers and beetles occur, and they will not occur once the forest grows back. So what we do in Europe a lot, we preserve these open areas by cutting the trees or by having cattle or sheep or whatever to maintain these artificial or man-made environments, because we like this diversity. And I fully understand that from a point of view from outside, you say this is crazy, but there is a certain value of having diverse landscapes. And my argumentation last night was that anyway, in Europe, I mean, we messed it up pretty much for several thousands of years. So there are not very many trees that have been just naturally grown. Most of it is planted, it's managed. And so why not use this landscape, which is already pretty spoiled, to have this diversity of potential landscapes that otherwise would be covered by forest everywhere.
Yeah, well, you're right. There are very few natural landscapes left in Europe. In fact, the Brazilians get really upset when the Europeans come and tell them what to do. It's like, look what you did to your place. Who are you to tell us what to do? And they've got a good point. I mean, you could say, to me, my argument to the Brazilians would be, well, you're right. The Europeans, they wiped out all their natural land, so they're trying to tell you of the voice of experience. Maybe you want to save some of yours. In the United States, it's a little bit more of a balance between the two, where we have a lot of national parks and wilderness areas where you can't, in wilderness areas in the United States, you can't bring any kind of mechanized equipment in, like not even, a chainsaw, nothing. And they preserve that, but we have a lot more abundant land than you have in Europe.
Yeah, so that's one of the problems. We're really not, we don't have many areas that we can just leave to themselves, but we do. And there are some forests now, some national parks in Europe that we just leave to themselves, where we don't take away the trees that fell down or something. We don't go and clean the landscape. We just leave it. But it's a small part still.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's still interesting to see this point of view from outside. So did you find other points of view while you were traveling? Like African people, maybe they have a completely different approach to how to interact with natural systems. And
I haven't been working in Africa for the past like 5-10 years, but I don't think there's. I think the sense of for Africans, the sense of I think that the sense of protecting nature there is relatively new for Africans, indigenous Africans, and I don't want to. I feel hesitant to try as a foreigner to be speaking for Africans because it's not my place. But I just when I was a young guy traveling in Africa, the crass view was like nature was to be exploited. It was the natural world, and we're going to take the resource. It's kind of like the Wild West sort of attitude. But it was this very extractive mentality towards the wilderness, and I think say particularly in East Africa, as the wild places have all gotten overrun, like Nairobi National Park is now like a fenced-in area near the airport. It's because there's been more and more population pressure. I think people are starting to realize that they need to preserve that, but that's relatively new. And I think it's a good thing. But it's a good thing. But it's a good thing because they've been forced to do that because the wild spaces are getting gobbled up. It's very sad. And there's been so much poaching. It's really sad.
Yeah. And doing the research for this interview, correct me if I'm wrong, but I got the impression that it's not so much your point to moralize with the images about how we produce our food and to make a statement or to encourage everybody to become vegan all of a sudden, but more to show man's impact on nature and what our way of producing food what the effect is on nature and landscape. Is that correct? Or
yes, that's correct. I don't want to tell people what to do. I don't think it's my place. I don't think it's very effective. And I think you have to make people come to their own conclusions. People come to their own conclusions. It's much more powerful. So if you tell people, you explain some of the facts, that, for example, if the amount of, let's say, protein consumption there is in the United States or in Europe compared to what it is, let's say, in China or India, and you say, wow, we consume like a multiple of the protein, but like the Amazon's getting deforested by Chinese demand for protein. Well, who are we to tell the Chinese that they can't eat the same amount of protein that we're eating? And just like if everybody in the world has as many cars per capita as we have in the United States, we're fucked. And so if you're an American, you hear that say, geez, well, maybe that means that we shouldn't have 3 cars. We should have 2 cars or 1 car per family. Also, in America's defense, Europeans think Americans are gross with their car consumption, but we've got much less population density than you have in Europe, and so there aren't train networks that are subsidized by the government to get around like there are here. And so, if you would live in most of America, you need a car to travel, and you can't get around by bike and train. It's a different system. So.
I like that approach, or to not moralize with your message, or don't have a message that you want to convey to others, and it's more powerful if you come to your own conclusions. Having had that much insight into the food production, what were your personal conclusions that you drew from everything that you saw along the way? Is there something?
It's still, I'm actually sincere in that I'm not like a moralizer. I'm not biting my tongue. It's just like, it's, I have to be able to go into a slaughterhouse, for example, and talk. It's very difficult to get into slaughterhouses. And I find them fascinating to photograph. I never miss an opportunity to go to a slaughterhouse, to be honest, but kind of weird in that way. But I had to, when you talk your way in, you have to, be able to make the people there feel comfortable with you going in. And so I can't lie to them But you can say, wow, it's like, the like 30,000 pigs a day. Like, how do you do that? That's incredible. And like, what do you do with all the noses, and what do you do with the feet, and what do can I see? And I actually am sincere, but you try and put it forward in a good way. But you also know, I know in the back of my head that, the vegan's going to go crazy when they see these pictures, and people, it's going to be upsetting to people. And I also think, if you're really upset by looking at slaughterhouses, then you shouldn't be eating meat, because that's where it came from. And in the industrialized world, everybody goes to the supermarket and they buy something, a little piece of meat, in a little foam tray with a piece of clear plastic and a little barcode on it. And, they don't see the pig or the chicken or whatever. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I also, once I got into this project, is I realized that there are segments of our food systems that the people who make the stuff don't want us to see, because if they saw we wouldn't buy it. And that's a problem.
Yeah.
I think we need more transparency. So, that's right.
Today, we are here at the festival Open Your Eyes, which is trying to build a bridge between science and photography, which is also, which is a very interesting topic to touch on, to close this interview. Today at the panel discussions, there were photographers and scientists, both on the stage, and there was a quite interesting, discussions. And one of the questions that came from the audience later on was, and I'm going to steal this question from Anna Maria. She asked in what way photographers can serve scientists to better convey their research, or the results of their researches. What would be your answer to that question?
Well, I mean, in what way? I think that photography is a great way to get people interested in science, but you have to do pictures that actually decode the science, that explain it. And some things, something I've worked at a lot in when I used to do a lot of science photography. I won World Press Photo. I won first place twice for science photography. And to do it well, you have to be able to visually explain what's going on. And sometimes with some kinds of science, it's not very obvious how to do that. You have to think really hard and be a little creative to find out a way to decode it. But if you can do that, I think it's incredibly effective, and it helps get people interested in science, which I think is really important too. I mean, that's one of the reasons humans have become the dominant species, because of the advancement of science and knowledge. So it's really key to our survival and our sustainability.
Yeah, I had a discussion around this also last night around with lots of wine with Gerd Ludwig. And the question came up, with photography, you document, as you say, you visually explain things, but can photography also show solutions?
I personally don't feel like photography can. I don't feel that's the role of journalism, is to tell people what to do. And I think you can, I think that the classic role of photography is to point out problems, is to, like, the news, and what are the issues of the day, and what are the challenges we're facing. But it's not like an instruction guide how to make the world a better place. I just don't. I think if you show, there have been, like, in the panel discussion today, it came up like how the Civil War pictures, it changed people's idea about war. People had never seen pictures of what it was like, and that really communicated the horrors of war. I'm talking about the American Civil War. Where there were famous pictures taken of, let's say, like slaughterhouses in Chicago back at the turn of the century, Jacob Riis, and people was like, whoa, this is really, these sweatshops, it's really awful. And so it started the labor movement in the United States. And so they can be really effective in making change, but I don't really believe, to be honest, in advocacy journalism. I think when you start advocating, you lose your credibility.
It was said that science usually goes deep and is more complex and abstract, and that photography has the power to show things in a more accessible way, and to kind of target emotions and try to reach people on that level. To how do you go about your own images when you go somewhere to make them so that they become accessible, that people can relate to them? And
well, I really like stories that pictures that tell a story. And I want to picture, see something that's visually interesting, but they look at it and they understand something they didn't understand before. And so it works on multiple layers. But first you have to kind of dazzle people with something they haven't seen. And then it's like, oh, wow, now that's really interesting. Look at that. And so I actually believe that photography can actually be quite deep, but it's a deep in a different way than science is. But it's just, and sometimes a picture can communicate a scientific concept incredibly quickly, and people are like, "Oh, I get it." And I've had some moments, like some projects I worked on, when I was successful with that, and it's very, very satisfying when you can do that.
I would like to know what you would tell a young person that comes up to you, maybe someone who just finished college and wants to go into photojournalism. What kind of advice would you give someone like that? Like, try to get some assignments, try to get a job, or try to, as you did, just go someplace and do something that you're interested in, or something that is meaningful to yourself. What would you suggest?
Well, those kinds of passions are very, you don't realize it when you're young, but they're very precious, and you should follow those passions because they're not going to be there forever. And I think you should, and you should photograph what you know or what you're really curious about, or write about what you know or what you're curious about. But at the same time, photography is getting, the profession is under a lot of stress, and it's getting more and more difficult to make a living as a professional photographer. So I would also advise somebody to have a plan B. I had a plan B, and photography is a lot tougher now than it was when I got started.
It also ties a little bit into what we've talked about earlier, that you started at a time when budgets were big, and another difference is today maybe there's not that many gatekeepers anymore. Like as a journalist or as a photographer, you can create your own channels to get out your images and to become known for a topic, and you're a good example actually of that. Like if you look at your Instagram account, for example, you're very successful there. You have more than 1 million followers there. Do you sometimes think about that? Is there something that's important to you, knowing that you also have a channel that you can reach people on a large scale with your images? Or is social media a game that you don't care so much about the numbers and what it might imply?
I don't get often the ego of having 1 million followers. To me, it's helpful in photography because you're like, I'm trying to get access to something. It validates you to get access to something. But the frustrating thing about editorial photography is I've got 1 million followers, and it's really non-monetary. I don't do sponsored posts, and it's not because I'm hyper ethical. Like nobody ever, there's no offers, and I don't want to spend my time trying to say, hey, what if I wore your shoes and took a picture of my shoes, on a mountain? Would you, give me a free pair of shoes? I don't want to be that guy. And so I just don't. It's nice, but you get a lot of likes, and it is really fun when I'll do a post that might get tens of thousands of likes or lots of comments. And you reach people, but I think it's still important to take pictures that satisfy yourself, that you think are important. And sometimes I'll do something that I think I'll do a great picture, and I say, well, this is not going to do well on Instagram. It's a great photo, but it's just not going to do well. And something else that's kind of a superficial thing, this is going to go crazy on Insta, and I'll post that. And so it's a different medium. And I've had pictures that my editors, let's say National Geographic, wanted me to push me really hard to do, and I would go and be successful getting that picture, put up on Instagram. It would go nowhere. And then something else that's just it's lots of color and pattern. A lot of what I'm seeing on Instagram now is pictorialism. It's like pretty pictures, colors and patterns, and all these dogs and cats or whatever. But there's a lot of that stuff where it's just kind of like thumb candy and doesn't have a lot of depth to it.
I would like to listen to a story, something that you really like to think back of, like a situation, an encounter that you had? Maybe the story that touched you most or something. Is there something like that?
Well, in terms of pictures, the ones that to be honest, I'm often most satisfied with were the ones the most difficult to take, where it's like physically or something was really difficult to get access to. It's kind of like the harder the struggle, the sweeter the success. But that's not always the best picture. And probably the picture I'm best known for is a picture I took in Arabia many years ago. I was looking down on some camels going out to graze, and it was looking straight down the camels. It was early in the morning, and so when you look at it, you see the camel shadows, and it looks like the camels, but it's actually, you're looking at the shadow. It's like an illusion, optical illusion, and it was a relatively easy pic. I mean, I was paragliding; it was not that easy, but in Arabia, but it was a pretty easy picture to take compared to other things I've done. But it just became like this. It went viral, and it's been praised and whatever. And it's like, I'm not embarrassed about the picture, but I didn't put that much into it compared to things where I really actually almost risked my life taking a certain picture, and I'm more proud of that. But it's okay.
You mentioned that you feel that you're coming to the end of this project, Feed the Planet, that's like kind of slowly fading out. Is there already an idea for what's going to come next for you? Are you thinking about new projects?
I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to figure it out, and I haven't settled on something. I want to do something that's impactful. I feel like I'm 66. I figure I got one other like mega project in me. And I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do. It's interesting, seeing what other people are doing, trying to find. I like to do something that's unique, that can make a significant contribution to our understanding of our world and the challenges we're facing as people these days. But I haven't settled on the next big thing yet. But I've also found like you don't really find something until you need it, and so I'm starting to need it, and hopefully I'll find something.
Something's going to come up.
Usually does.
Yeah. One question more related to the panel discussions we had today about the scientists and photographers. There were many questions coming up. Was there something particular that you took away from this dialogue? Some thought that stayed with you? Something that you're gonna be pondering? Or
well, I thought it was interesting. They're talking about how younger people are looking at photography, consuming photography information. And I think a lot of it is right now. There's with how we're so bombarded with information, like with social media, it's just kind of like people have very short attention spans. But I found that conversation really interesting, and it was also curious hearing about scientists. You were saying earlier, like scientists are deep and photographers are kind of superficial, and I don't quite agree with the simplification of it. But I do think they have a unique role to play. It's interesting when I was up in the Alps last week with a scientist, and he didn't. He was kind of dismissive, like, oh, a photographer. But then, I'll take pictures, and their work would get read more in pictures than it will be in scientific journals. And I think he was making actually a kind of a mistake not to be more accommodating to what I wanted to do. But that's right.
Great. Well, thank you very much, George. It's been a pleasure talking about your photography here in Zurich. Thank you very much for taking the time, and all the best for your upcoming projects. And
thank you for taking the time to sit down and talk. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Ja, das war das Interview mit George Steinmetz, gemeinsam mit Pia Parolin. An dieser Stelle an dich, Pia, nochmal ein ganz, ganz herzliches Dankeschön, dass du mit dabei warst. Wenn du weitere Informationen über den Gate 7 Podcast haben möchtest, dann schau dich gerne auf der Webseite um, www.gate7.de, 7 ausgeschrieben, nicht als Zahl. Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören und auf bald. Dein Kai.